Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. My name is Roy Bensby, and I'm your host. And I want to explain a little bit about the podcast before we start the show this week. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know that I can find on the internet. So, either with amazing talents or achievements or just unbelievable life stories or invaluable insights into areas that they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from all across the world. Really, I've talked to people from Slovenia to the Czech Republic to Australia to countries in Africa and South America, really just all over the world. And I try to ask them the questions that will hopefully help you extract something valuable or learn something new or just get inspired by. And I do hope that you do get inspired by these talks with some sort of a call to action, maybe change something that you wanted to change for a while, or even just enjoy, detaching from the world for an hour and listening to some great conversations. So whatever it is that you get from this, I do hope that you extract something from it and enjoy the conversations. All these episodes are available on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google, and the rest of them. You can also find the episodes on my website, which is roybensv.com. You can find a lot of other information about me there as well, from photos to a little bit more insights into who I am, if you're interested. And, you can always go to social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there. I'm pretty active on both those platforms, although the only ones I have. And I try to post regularly so you can stay up to date. And also be sure to put your email on the website. I shoot emails out with updates, news, any new current information that I have will be sent via those emails and social media platforms. So yeah, make sure you're in the loop. This week on the podcast, we have Elias Elhardt. Elias is a snowboarder from Austria, originally born in Germany. And he has a very impressive resume from snowboarding some of the biggest mountains in the world with some of the best snowboarders in the world to being in some of the most interesting and crazy documentaries about snowboarding. So he's really been a part of it for a while. And, if you want to watch some of his films, feel free to look up. I think it's on IMDb, but I'm not sure. But he's been on, with Travis Rice. The movie's called Dark Matter. He's got another one on YouTube. It's called Contraddiction, which is a really kind of beautiful, artsy, a little bit of a different vibe, more introspective, more. I know the movie just had a completely different feel. The cinematography was a little bit different. The way he presented it was different. I really enjoyed it because I like different. I don't want to keep watching the same film over and over again. So when someone has a different spin on something that's been done a million times already, it's always refreshing. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed our conversation. I like talking to him about snowboarding. He was giving us some insight about the mental capacity and what you have to go through just to get to the top of the mountain with the helicopter up the ridge and then snowboarding down, and all the while staying completely focused on the task at hand while obviously having an amazing time with some good friends. And it's just an interesting insight into someone that performs on the highest level possible at his sport. And I think when you see someone doing something and they're doing it at the highest level, it's poetry in motion. Doesn't matter if it's a chess player, a snowboarder, an MMA star, Michael Jordan, whatever, even not sports related, right? But when you're seeing someone performing on the highest level, it's just poetry in motion. And that's what I see when I see him and Travis Rice and a bunch of others that are just snowboarding these unbelievably beautiful mountains in these untouched mountain ranges, especially in Alaska. It's so massive, and the population there is so scarce. Like, I feel like a lot of those areas have just barely been touched. It's not accessible, right? If you're not a really high level mountaineer, or if you don't have a helicopter, I mean, that's pretty much the only ways you can access those those areas. And the cinematography is always very cool on these things, and the music choice. So I enjoy those type of movies, anything nature related that's authentic. Like some of these, and I just don't feel like they're very authentic. But when it's authentic and done well, I just feel like it's must see TV. And we also discussed climate change, the effects that it's going to have on the smaller mountains, unfortunately, the ones that can't compete with the bigger ones because they're going to have shorter seasons, less snow, and just less people are going to eventually come until they have to shut down because unfortunately they're just not going to be able to compete with the bigger ones. It is the unfortunate side effect of climate change, one of many. Obviously, you know, the bigger ones are that are pertinent to our survival are the more important ones. But I do feel like this is important. It's people's livelihoods, it's restaurants, it's hotels, it's flights, it's rental companies. There's just so much that goes into any one of these smaller, not to mention the big ones that have whole industries around them, but even the smaller ones. It's people's livelihoods. It's people that have been there for many, many decades, and this is what they love. This is what they do, and it just does not seem like this is what they're going to be able to do in the future. Unfortunately, the bigger ones, I think they'll be okay. They might hike up prices, but I think that overall they will survive. And maybe if humanity starts acting in a bit more of a pressing manner, we'll be able to, I don't want to say negate, but maybe stall some of the side effects that we are already seeing and we're definitely going to be seeing in the future. Snowboarding is one of those things I personally love doing. It's one of my favorite activities. It's something I wait for all year for the snow to arrive. And I know a lot of my friends feel the same, and people all over the world do as well. And I think during COVID, we realized that we need activities that we love. We be staying at home and just working, it's not enough, and it's making a lot of people crazy. So we need those outlets to run, to ski, to play basketball, whatever it is that you're into, MMA, Muay Thai. You should be able to participate in those activities with your friends, with your teammates. And it's just, that's what I guess, it's one thing, but it's one thing that makes life a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting, worth living outside of work, family. You have to have some sort of a love for something. So that's one of my things. And obviously, Elias as well. He's super passionate about it. And you can see when he talks about it, you can see when he's cutting down these unbelievably large mountains and the way that he snowboards. You can tell that he's super passionate about this. And this is something that, he's been doing for a long time and hopefully will be doing for a long time because we enjoy watching him. Like I said, it's poetry in motion at the highest level. It's always fun to watch people do that. And yeah, we had a really good conversation. And I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Make sure to, give him a follow, give the podcast a follow as well. And that's it for me. So I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. Here is Elias Elhardt.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
How you doing?
Good. Yeah. Just trying to figure out how I got the phone charging so I don't disconnect. But yeah, everything's pretty well. I was just surfing for so long that I couldn't even pedal into waves anymore.
Really?
I guess 3 hours altogether.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was really good.
You're in Portugal, right?
Back in the van. Yeah, I'm in Portugal.
Yeah. How's the weather?
The weather, just pretty perfect, honestly. I love it that way. The nights are cold, the days are sunny and warm, and the water is in degrees. It's maybe like 18 degrees, 19 degrees. So,
wow.
4-3 wetsuit is just perfect. Yeah, it's been really good now.
Yeah. Don't they have some of the biggest waves in the world there?
They do. I guess in Nazaré, that's like the famous big wave spot. I don't know when those waves are coming in. Probably around December, or I don't know. Anyways, that's far from what I'm surfing.
Because I remember I was watching videos, and it looks like something out of this world. It's just like 100 or 200-foot wave. I don't know how big it is, but it's massive. And you see this tiny little person just like surfing in the middle. I'm like, how is this person going to survive that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen videos of it too, and that place seems to be really nice. Like those shots that I've seen of it. Is it some really local building that's always in front, some watchtower or something, and then you see this massive wave in the background, and maybe like a tiny little stripe indicating that there's a person on it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Is that something
that it would have been nice to actually?
You'd want to do that?
Oh, no way. I'm like light years away from that level. And honestly, no, I mean, it's not even on me to talk about the possibility of ever aiming to do it. I do really enjoy, the playful aspect of surfing and really getting into that at the moment. And the idea of ever throwing myself into something very serious, even a couple of levels lower than that, I'm not sure whether this would be something I'd want to aim for in surfing. Like, I love it when the wave has some power to push you and you can play around in it, but this seems like really serious business.
Yeah, it's you're barely a dot in this massive force of gigatons of energy that is this massive wave. It's not something to take lightly, and like you can't even like surf out there, right? You have to have like, I think it's like what do you call it? One of those little jet skis that has to like paddle you out, and then you kind of, I don't know, find your wave. I don't know too much about it. I saw I remember a documentary about it that it looked too insane for me.
Right. There seems to be a lot going into it. So you have the jet skis pulling them in, but they also have some sort of like life vest that blows up when they're underwater, and still they're underwater for so long that they have to like go through a crazy training to keep their breath for, I don't know, a minute plus. And I don't know. So it seems to be really intense.
Yeah, that's the top level guys. That's that's not for the regular guy. But I see a lot of snowboarders that kind of, I feel like there's a lot of overlapping between surfing and snowboarding. You'll see a lot of snowboarders that in the off season, in the summertime, they'll go surfing, and then a lot of surfers that in the wintertime they'll do snowboarding. Is it because it's a little similar?
Yeah. I guess for the snowboarders especially, that makes sense because we are so tied down to the season. So there is an off season. There is a time in the summer that we can really venture out and do other things. A lot of snowboarders really get into skateboarding and get actually pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And surfing as well. It's just a beautiful board sport as well, that there is quite a bit of crossover points that I think once you've really thrown yourself into like board sports and developed a feel for board sports, then it's easier to translate. I mean, nevertheless, it's still a whole new sport. You need to learn from the start, but maybe some steps are easier once you're on the wave or, on the skateboard and the bowl or something. You've already learned a bit more on the board. And so I guess that's been beautiful that you can connect those dots a bit.
If you're a surfer that has never snowboarded, does that give you an advantage coming in and trying snowboard for the first time more than like, let's say, someone who's done, I don't know, skateboarding or some other, board or sports that involve boards?
No, I think if you're a good surfer, you should be snowboarding fairly quick and fairly good, I think, because surfing is so complex. How to stand on the board and to ride well and to turn well. And so it's much harder than snowboarding, really, where you're strapped in. And I think if you've really learned that technique well on a surfboard, then I would think you could translate it quite well onto snow.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never tried surfing. I just, I've always done only snowboarding, but I've always wondered if I would try surfing, if that would translate, if I would have some sort of an advantage coming in, the fact that I've been doing, I don't know, snowboarding for 10 years now, if I would come in and I would feel some sort of a comfort or some sort of a familiarity trying to do surfing rather than not doing anything at all.
So you mean the other way around from snowboarding to surfing? I think that there is a bit of an advantage as well. I mean, that would have been what my experience was like. But, there's so much going into it until you catch the wave and until you're okay on your board that you have to kind of learn before you even can take any sort of benefit from having a bit of board control and knowing how to turn. And all the stuff that's happening before, paddling in, reading the wave and getting up and all of that stuff. It's so difficult to learn, really.
Yeah.
That with all of that, I almost feel like you start where everyone else does. And then, yes, once you do get on your board and you start to turn a bit, that's probably where it helps if you've had, time on your board already. And if you feel comfortable turning around and playing around a bit.
So for people that may not know you, Elias is one of the best big mountain snowboarders in the world. Is that right to say?
I wouldn't take that claim. But, I'm a professional snowboarder.
Professional. I mean, definitely one of the best. I mean, I've seen some of the documentaries that you were in and some of the lines that you've done in some of the biggest mountains in the world. And I mean, you're up there, definitely one of the best. You're originally from Germany, right?
Yes, I'm from Germany. Actually, all the way down south, close to Austria and Switzerland in that triangle. So where the Alps really start. That's where I grew up.
Okay. And now you still live there or you live in Austria?
I live in Austria now, in Innsbruck. So that's 2.5 hours drive from where I grew up.
Yeah. So you have a lot of mountains available.
Yeah, Innsbruck is pretty incredible in that regard. It's really such a unique city that's right in the middle of mountains. You have mountains that are 2,500 meters high on both sides of the city, and right there, the houses even go up to each of those mountains. So you could be at a ski resort in 20 minutes from your house to dropping in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really made Innsbruck so special for me. That in the meantime, there's also some culture. There's lots of universities. There's some life outside of the board sport world and outside of the sport world altogether, which I really appreciated. And I love to be so close to snowboarding and yet to have a chance to incorporate more into my life other than just the snowboarding part of it.
Yeah, that's what I love about, there's certain places in Europe, in mainly Austria, Switzerland, around obviously the Alp region, northern Italy, where the city and the mountains are kind of interconnected. You can just, enjoy the city life, and they have really beautiful cities. But then, the gondola to take you up the mountain is 5-10 minutes away. And there's these amazing mountains, just vast open spaces. And you don't really have that anywhere else in the world. That's really that type of lifestyle. That's really very European. You don't here in the US, there's obviously big mountains, but there's not that same really city life around it. It's just the people who come there are specifically, that's the only reason, right? It's just a little different.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that creates a whole different vibe. If you're in a place that's more or less a resort that is tailored to just fit that sport or tourism altogether,
Yeah.
then it creates that really touristic, bubbly sort of vibe, which in itself could be nice as well. Like it becomes something for its own, like say Whistler.
Yeah.
It's its own world, where all the people from all over the world get there and they make this place so unique, and this then creates its own sort of spirit. But Whistler wouldn't be the place it is, or would be far from anything like that, if it wasn't for all those sports that are done there, like mountain biking and winter sports.
Yeah.
And I think that really shapes so much of it. And I like the idea, if there is some foundation still present that has nothing to do with the sport. And yeah, like maybe in Europe it's a bit more like that, because say Whistler, for instance, I think it grew so quick. Like it's insane. I read into it a bit. Like it grew so incredibly quick in 50 years or so from scratch. I don't nail me down on this, but like in comparison, of course, with some of the valleys that in Europe that have been around, farmers have been around for a very long time. Or Innsbruck has quite a long history. There's just been a lot of other things before the sport was even a thing.
Yeah. There's just this vibe when you go to one of these like ski towns in Europe that just, I don't know, it doesn't exist anywhere else. And obviously you've been around the world. You've skied, I'm sure, much more places than I have. But I've never, even here in the U.S., like you can, or Canada, where the mountains are really big in Colorado or Montana or Whistler, but the feeling, the vibe, it's just not the same. You can't replicate what Europe has. It's just unique to Europe, and it's not like that it's better or worse. It's just unique to that part of the world.
Yeah. I would think so. There's definitely parts that are a bit like, well, so, like all the upper ski, if you're into it, maybe.
Yeah.
But there is definitely the Euro specific things, just as much as there is US specific sort of vibe and scene in winter sport culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's only normal that these things shape in a way as much as the society is shaped. Like it's only a reflection of the society really in this small scale of winter sport resorts.
So at what age did you start snowboarding?
I started with 11, I think. Yeah, I was 11 then. I was skateboarding a couple of years before that. And I was skiing really early on. I think I was skiing from age 2 on.
Yeah.
So like,
I was going to say 11 is old. Because like I see it in Austria, like 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds just like on the slopes skiing already.
Right. Yeah. No, the skiing was just so normal. It was just something you grow up with. But then snowboarding wasn't really around so much where I grew up in, at least.
Yeah.
The trend really caught on. When I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
All good.
So, I guess. And then I really got into it though pretty quick and really dedicated all my time to snowboarding and so fell in love with it.
Is skiing / snowboarding pretty much the biggest sport? I don't know, maybe not the biggest because obviously there's football, but as far as just everyone doing it, right? Like, do you have friends that don't ski or snowboard that you grew up with?
That's a good question. I mean, not really.
It seems like no.
It's weird. Like, it's a weird question because, like, it's something like, not everyone does it like full on. Some would, do it like once or twice a winter and more go for a walk kind of style. But like they still are on the slopes or they go to resorts just because it's most people, they just grow up with it in one way or another. Actually, I do have a friend that has never done it, but she's from Somalia. So
okay.
she just didn't grow up with it in the same way.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if she grew up here, she would have started it in some ways, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I remember like when, you know, when I've skied in Austria a bunch of times and you would see kind of the kids, like the parents would drop them off after school at the local mountain. And that's what they would do. That was like it seems like the after school activity to just, you know, ski or snowboard. And they were so good. They're like 8 years old. And I'm just looking at them like, God damn, these kids are phenomenal, right? Like no fear, just going up and down the mountain until it's nighttime. That was their like, you know, after school activity. Here it's football or basketball or whatever it is. And there it's skiing.
Yeah. I mean, depending on like how close people live to the mountains, but like, say in areas like Tyrol, where it's really all over the place, the resorts, and where winter is also pretty long, then in winter, when there's like 0.5 meter snow outside, it would be hard to just go play soccer all year long, I guess. And so it's just then the activity, what to do in the winter time, while of course all these kids, or many of them would be playing soccer and being soccer teams in the summer. Yeah. That was the case for me at least. Like I would play soccer in the summer, but like winter was just normal to go skiing.
Is climate change a real issue? I mean, it obviously is a real issue, but as far as the mountains, I mean, you're getting more warm weather, less snow, less cold days, more warm days, and I feel like I don't know if it's already affecting. I'm sure it is, but it's going to start affecting these mountains in a more serious way, and it's going to affect the ski resorts' income, people coming in, in shorter amounts of time, all the hotels, all the restaurants that kind of depend on the tourists coming in as their livelihoods. I mean, there's obviously an environmental impact, but there's also going to be a economic impact to that as well, right?
No, totally. And also where I grew up personally, like I said, mentioned earlier, that it is at the start of the Alps. The region is called Allgäu. Mm-hmm. And the mountains there aren't so high. So they're starting around, the resorts are starting around 800 to maybe 1,000 meters. And then they go to like 2,000 meters maximum, like just around there. And that's a lot of the resorts, they just can't do much winter, can't offer much in the winter anymore. And snow cannons don't really help. Artificial snow can't really buffer that. Yeah. That the temperatures got so much warmer that, the resorts that I grew up riding at, that was really normal to like just go to after school, like you said. That is rare now. Or even behind my house, which is 800 meters high. Sorry, I'm not like saying in speed.
No, it's fine. I'm used to meters as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, So I don't want to say anything wrong to translate it. But anyways, so that is where I was really like, I would come home from school and build a jump behind my house. And I know that now it's just becoming much more rare for this to be possible at all. So I can really see it in the region that I grew up in.
Yeah. I mean, are we going to you think we'll get to a point where we'll only have the big mountains, only have the Whistlers and the Vales and the Big Sky, and all the little ones are just going to have to shut down because they're just not going to have enough snow?
Yeah. I think it's really unfortunate, the whole evolvement that we can see, and that's probably continuing to be there, is that winter sports is becoming more and more exclusive in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, the resorts are becoming less, but bigger, much bigger, those resorts, but also much more expensive.
Yeah.
And And I mean, especially in the US, as far as I know, it's like incredible the prices of a lift ticket.
Yeah.
It seems like so exclusive already.
I think in
if you just
Vail,
buy
it's
a day
like
pass,
in Vail, they're like $100 and something dollars a day.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think at least, but you would know better. But maybe you have good like season pass options. That's what I heard that a lot of people then do, and they're actually really, really good in comparison. But I don't know. Other than that, it really is unfortunate that the sport that we love in the end is so is exclusive already and probably has been in the past, but is becoming a lot more exclusive now for the time to come. And I think what I've described at home in Europe, it just has been such a normal sport for literally everyone growing up. And probably that's also going to change. Like I said, in the region where I grew up, it's just not as easily possible anymore. And then people would probably migrate to like those, or would go to those much bigger, much higher resorts that then would rise prices.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm afraid that that's an evolvement we're gonna see more of.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like the economics of it are just going to make it so they're going to keep raising prices, because if they have to, make more artificial snow, or if they have to, if they have shorter seasons or what, it seems like all their costs on their end are just going to keep rising. And then that's going to fall into the consumer. So eventually,
Right.
it's just going to be pricier and pricier. But I don't know. I hope that the big ones, like I said, the Whistlers or the big ones in Europe as well, survive and somehow, I don't know how, but somehow manage to sustain it for future generations. Because, it's one of for me, like I wait all year for winter, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure a lot of people as well. And it's so unfortunate if that's not something that, future generations are going to be able to enjoy. It's going to be very sad.
Yeah. I mean, of course, in the bigger scheme of things, of climate change, it's totally meaningless in a way, whether we get to ski or not. Yeah. But because there's so much bigger issues connected to it. But of course, for a very personal point of view, if you found so much joy in doing it and you see it changing already drastically right now, not just in like future generations, then there is one sad aspect of the change we see coming at us.
Yeah. But, I think to the point that you made, I think in COVID times, we've seen like how important it is for people to do what they love. I think when everyone's in this quarantine or lockdown and they're not able to go to the gym or meet people or enjoy the activities that they enjoy, I think you see people starting to lose their minds a little bit and, go into the depression and anxiety and all these different things, mental issues. So I think these outlets of snowboarding or whatever it is that you like doing, right? Football, doesn't matter, just surfing. I think these things are very important for human development. So, obviously it's more important for us to have water and food, but I do think that, snowboarding and being outdoors, enjoying those things are not obviously not as important, but, independently important as well.
Yeah, I get your point, and I agree that it is such a incredibly valuable part of life, really.
Yeah.
It's not just to sustain life, I guess it's also to find joy. And if you do find joy in doing sports, it's amazing, and I would never underestimate the power of it to bring people together, to create a lot more than just the pure pleasure. But also the pleasure, like that in itself is just value to be had. And that I never would want to talk down or small. It's just that from the position of, say, a snowboarder or a winter sport enthusiast, when you do talk about climate change and maybe ramble about the fact that it is getting warmer, it just so easily has a weird taste to it. While, as mentioned, it is already such an exclusive sport, and climate change is driven by those most fortunate that can consume, can spend, can fly around the world. And so it is just very easily a tricky terrain to move upon, like in the position that we're on. That's why, like, I don't really want to position myself strongly as, say, a winter sport enthusiast that now needs to fight for whatever the snow to stick around, while I know there's so much other problems that maybe are caused from this place of privilege and that cause a lot more damage in other areas, really, of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Your film, I saw your film, I think a couple of months ago. I guess I don't know if you call it Contraddiction or Contraddiction or both.
Yeah, well, it's nice that you caught on to this. I guess it's easy to like just overread or think what they did a misspelling there. Yeah, I guess that was at the start of the idea that I wanted to combine in a way, in one word, the passion and the love that I have for the sport, which would be the addiction.
Yeah.
In some ways, and then the contradiction that emerges from it, which is basically what we just talked about. Being so in love with this nature sport, which snowboarding really is. You do it outside, and you have so much appreciation for your surrounding, and yet you use a lot of resources to do it, and it's not always good for nature and for what you love anyway. That's just one aspect of it. It shouldn't only be about environmental impact. It should also be the film about growing up, getting older in a sport that's sort of dedicated its identity to eternal youth in some ways. That is at least at the core of the snowboard idea, the scene, and for good reasons in some ways, because what at the core of snowboarding is this freestyle approach, this playful approach to the mountains, but even beyond, to anything, just to be lighthearted and do these things in a lighthearted way, which I find a lot of beauty in. But then again, like I said, you grow up and you want to take responsibility eventually. And how does that fit together or find purpose other than just your own joy? And so these are topics that I wanted to engage in with that project.
Yeah, honestly, it was one of my favorite, snowboard or sports documentaries. I just feel like a lot of times when I watch these movies, I just skip ahead, excuse me, to the snowboarding part because they lack some sort of a depth. But this was such a different film than most of the others that I've ever seen. It was just much more like introspective and dark and artistic and I don't know, it was just very different than 99% of all the other snowboarding films, and I've seen a lot of them that I've seen. So that's something that I really appreciated for you to take something that there's hundreds of movies about and give it a completely different spin. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I really, love to hear that you like it. I actually have also been working in the snowboard film industry for so long, and participated in so many films. That was beautiful, and that was a dream of mine to go to all these amazing places, and they showcase snowboarding in the most beautiful and maybe also progressive way.
Yeah.
But with time, I also felt like I wanted to use this platform and to tell a bit of a story that meant more to me than just the pure joy of riding, and maybe a story that reflects on the controversies that I would, carry around with me for so long. And so that was a very personal project. And in the end, that I really threw myself into for whatever, 1.5 years, close to 2 years.
Wow.
So I'm really happy to hear that it resonated with you. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I've seen you in other movies as well, obviously in Dark Matter with Travis Rice, who is a snowboarding god, for lack of a better term. How
Right.
when you're snowboarding, so I guess 2 questions, but I guess first is, how is it snowboarding with Travis? How is that experience?
Yeah, that was really funny. Coming from, say, this direction that I've gotten into, where I was using more snowboarding as a tool, as a vehicle to tell stories that meant something to me. And after Contraddiction, I then went to Kosovo and spent a good portion of the season in Kosovo and told the story of how the winter sports basically got people together from different backgrounds. And saying that, I was really like a bit outside of this very performance-oriented approach to snowboarding.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got the invitation from Travis to come on this trip to Alaska, which was, of course, a dream, but also it was so far from where I saw myself at the time. But anyways, I took the chance, came to Alaska, and yeah, it was amazing to ride with him, to get to know him better, and to get to know his approach to the mountains. Yeah, really loved the experience there. It was very intense 3 weeks that we've had, and
Yeah.
basically the whole film, the whole Dark Matter film was filmed in those 3 weeks. That was pretty special too, that we did like a whole 26 minutes film in 3 weeks, and then it was done. Like,
Wow.
filming wise.
Wow.
That was really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's also like, it's really high level videography and cinematography and I guess post editing, but it's just the lines that you guys do there. He seems like he just has absolutely like no fear. He just, I don't know. It's like that same analogy that we made for the massive waves and that tiny little person. Like, if you kind of zoom out, you see a tiny little person on this huge mountain, and there's just potential for rockfall and avalanche and just no fear.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. But I think more than that, he just has so much skill and determination. And that's what I've really seen. He's incredibly talented. And alongside that, he's incredibly determined to pursue those goals that he sets himself. And I think that really comes into play to like what enables him to ride the lines like he does. I did not get to know Travis as like reckless in any way. He's very calculated. He's really smart, and he really thinks about the decision he's taken, and then like wraps his mind around those lines that he wants to ride, like for hours before, sometimes, checking photos, how he wants to ride them. So I think, given the level that he's at, it's totally doable for him with the determination and concentration that he's putting in. To then ride those lines. And of course, there is a risk remaining that he can control, whether it is avalanches or cornice falls or crevasses that could open up. Like, there's so many hazards, really.
Yeah.
And to those, like, towards those risks, I think there's also a lot of acceptance to be like, all right, which plays into the determination that I said. That was really interesting to witness and be a part of.
I mean, when you're snowboarding those lines, let's say in Alaska, right? And are you almost in a meditative state? I mean, are you just hyper aware, hyper alert, like almost like tunnel vision on the task ahead? Or are you just out there having fun like you would on, I don't know, riding down Whistler?
Yeah, it's actually, so that makes me think of some of the moments we've had up there. So in Alaska on that trip, it was just Travis and myself and two filmers. So that really helps if you have a tight crew, if you have a close crew, because also the group dynamics really come into play of how you experience the whole situation. You don't see all the other people maybe in the shot that you're riding down, but in fact, there's so much a part of it. There is everyone involved, really, like the cameraman and your buddy up there, maybe, giving you a hint here or there or supporting you. So that really plays a big role. And when it comes down to what you've asked, the sort of your mental state that you're in riding those bigger lines, it's really tunnel vision in some ways, I think.
Really?
You really just focused, and not that you couldn't just make jokes with your friend, and it's still fun, but it's at the same time you're really concentrated, and it's mentally draining and exhausting.
Yeah.
That's interesting how some days out in Alaska you just come home and you're so drained mentally, mostly.
Yeah.
I mean physically also, but I have never experienced it that strong as in Alaska, where so much can happen in one day that you're just mentally you're fried. Yeah. And I think that comes from the fact that it takes so much bandwidth to have the presence, which is kind of required in such situations, to really have that presence, to meet the situation that's involving so much risk and so much, say, decision making and on the spot presence.
Yeah, I mean, you're almost like it's almost like you're in a Formula One car, right? You're just heading down, and one little mistake, one little swerve to the left, swerve to the right, and it could be fatal. So you have to be, if I'm just snowboarding down the mountain, I'm not always in focus 100%. I could be looking back towards my friend. I'm taking in the scenery, but out there it's just like 100%. And it's also like, it's fairly short, right? It's not like, the whole thing lasts maybe a minute or so. Like, how long is it, like from top to bottom? It's not very long, right?
Right. Yeah. It depends on how long the line is. It could be maybe up to 2 minutes or so. If it's a long line, 2 minutes seems like forever, and it's not a very long time, but you would never be on a face for 2 minutes really unless you stop.
Yeah.
So it's more like less than a minute, which is incredible if you think of it. Less than a minute for sure, like maybe 30 seconds, some of the lines. But the thing is, what's mentally draining is not just the riding part of it. It's not just those, say, 45 seconds you really like riding down the mountain. It's everything that goes into it. It's, in the case of the trip I did with Travis, we were there with a helicopter. So that already is so nerve-wracking to be around this machine and to decide on the spot so quickly what you're going to do, where you want to be dropped off, decide that you're going to ride this line that you've just maybe seen seconds before.
Yeah.
And then to decide you want to be dropped off right next to that big cornice. And then, you do get dropped off with maybe in a way that the helicopter is just hovering. It's not sitting down because there's no way for it to sit down, and you try and get out light-footed so you don't disbalance the machine. And then you're out there all by yourself, so lonely as you've ever been.
Jesus.
Because you can't be picked up anymore. And then you realize that you're not at the start of your line yet. You still have to hike to it, and maybe on the backside where everything's blown up, there's not much snow there, and there's just a sheer rock face.
Yeah.
And So I'm just trying to like tell you, like, there's so many parts that like keep your heart pumping until the moment that you actually drop in. That is the intensity, I think, of that trip there.
Wow, you paint a very vivid picture.
Yeah, and then when it comes to the moment that you do drop in, I think that is also the beauty that everything else is there. There's no space for much other thoughts.
Yeah.
Not too present at least, and that is beautiful as well. Like how a situation so demanding could almost offer that to you, to like really having to be present. And yeah, nice. I think if that works.
Are there additional pressures, but to perform when the cameras are around? Like, are there lines maybe that normally if it was just you and Travis or just you and a friend, you would say, you know what, like, I'm not feeling this. I don't think I'm going to do this, but it's a movie and there's cameras and you're like, no, you know what? Fuck it. Let me try and do this. Is there any of that?
Yeah, for sure. It's its very own game, like to film for film production. This becomes, it doesn't just become an add-on. Oh, I do what I do anyways, and there happens to be someone filming. No, it's more like we're there, we're working together on creating those images, and so we're working really closely with the filmers too. And then it becomes its own sort of challenge. And of course, that challenge is so different from, say, if you just ride with your buddies. No,
yeah,
it's just so different. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you would take more risk necessarily, or that you're more sketchy, because everything is also a lot more thought through, If I'm with my friend just on a powder day, I'm like so loose sometimes that I'm like just jumping around and, like it's beautiful. It's amazing. But, I wouldn't look at the things as much as I do with filming. I wouldn't consider it as much. I'd probably take already 3 laps more.
Yeah.
Just like, jumping around everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I feel it on a micro scale when I go and, I was in Japan earlier this year in Niseko, and there's just this humbling feeling, right? When you're in these beautiful mountains and you see like a beautiful vista. And I mean, do you feel that when you're in this, places like Alaska where the mountains are just massive, do you kind of take it in sometimes? Like, do you have a minute to just say, wow, like this is extremely humbling, like the place that I'm in?
Yeah. No, definitely. And it's really important to do that when you get so like tunnel vision in snowboarding, in the snowboarding part of it. Maybe then for the time being, you almost oversee the beauty of the scenery that you're in.
Yeah.
And so for sure, it's really important for me, and I guess everyone that is out there with me and the whole film crew. And it's, to appreciate that and to take a moment and see all the beauty that's surrounding us and all the vast mountains. And yeah, for sure, humbling is a good term to describe the feeling I think that you can have when you look at it.
What would you say is your, if you have one, your favorite place? Or I mean, let's say, what do you say is some of the best snow on Earth as far as places you've been, and what is kind of your favorite place to snowboard?
So conditions-wise, if I only take conditions, for sure, Alaska, I've never seen anything like that.
Really?
It's just from a different world. When it comes to very, very steep lines, I think that the fact that we can ride such things in Alaska, which say in Europe would just be rock faces, is that it snows very humid. And so it sticks to the rocks. It snows humid because it's coastal snowpack, so it's closer to the ocean. And then there's all these dry, cold nights, and then it gets like, kind of perfect powder after it's stuck to all the rocks. And that creates these insanely steep faces. But that being said, that's just more or less like a dream, a trip to be had, like almost a mental trip, like to ride these lines. But it's not the reality that I also love so much about snowboarding. And so if I had to pick one place that I would only want to like ride, if I could, then it would be home, like literally home in those home resorts that I like around Innsbruck.
Really?
Because it's everything. You can't just say have a good day from just good snow conditions. You need lift access to make laps. In Alaska, it's more of a production situation where you have these incredible moments, but they're rare, and wait a long time for it, and then it costs an fortune to do. And say, around Innsbruck, you have lifts that go to all these places. You can take laps. You come back to the same hit over and over again. You do it with your friends. And so if you put all of this into the equation, then I would really say, out of all the places I've been around the world, home is the best to me. But that is probably because it's home,
Yeah.
So for others, that may just be where they're home, and that's beautiful. And that's, I think, how it should be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a nostalgia with home, right? It's like, it's also with food, right? If you're in a resort, if you go to most places here in the US, I would say the food is not great as far as ski resorts, but in Europe, it's pretty awesome. Like even on the mountain, you can have like really tasty food, great beers. It's just, I think that's also a part of it, like the experience that you can have on the mountain, which maybe, you can't have that everywhere else in the world. Like when I was in Japan now, that you didn't really, there weren't like stops along the way where you could stop for a beer or, I don't know, a goulash or whatever it is that you like. It was kind of like only at the bottom. So I feel like, I could see why you would, pick home as your favorite spot.
Yeah. And like you said, home is idealized in some ways, always. And that's probably good this way. A random comparison, I don't know if it fits at all, but the partner that you choose to be with is maybe not the most beautiful person in the world, probably not.
Yeah.
But you may see
Don't tell her that. Don't tell her
as such. Yeah, but you may even experience her as such, like, and to some extent at least,
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more emotion connected to it than, say, the objective. Oh, you're so and so, objectively speaking, and you don't want to have an objective relationship with the one you love or the places you love. You want to have your very own sort of relationship to it, and I think that's beautiful if you can have that.
Yeah, it's almost like by default, it's not objective, right? Like once you involve love into something, it's almost like objectivity is just out the door, right? Like
fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, fortunately, there's no place for it.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah, it is great. What, so, I mean, as far as, after going to places like Alaska and, some of the biggest mountains in the world, do you not have, I guess the question is, when you have people who always chase the bigger adrenaline dump, right? Like you'll have climbers who want the bigger wall or surfers who want the bigger surf, the bigger wave. And for you, and, I see this with other snowboarders as well. You do the biggest mountains, and then is it just, do you enjoy the smaller ones just as much? After having the big ones, it's almost like, this is small. It's like, it's almost like it just doesn't scratch the itch that you might have.
Right. No, I do see that I love it the most when I feel challenged.
Yeah.
When I can move around in that sort of gray area where you can still handle the situation, but you're really challenged to handle it. And yeah, like where you get in this present state, what we talked about before, riding those lines in Alaska, for instance. But the thing is, I feel like you can have that experience also in many other places. Say, riding at home, there's oftentimes days that I'm like, this is amazing, like, you know, conditions-wise.
Yeah.
It may not be the same as Alaska, but it has its own quality because I'm back up 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later with the lift doing the same lap again and again. And, you know, then you pick out a jump or two, like where you challenge yourself in that way. And I think that's, to sort of generalize it, I think where I find the most beauty is when you find something that really challenges you and you can still, you know, you can still deal with it well. And yeah, it's a beautiful mountain nevertheless, or snow, whether that is in Japan, Alaska, or Europe. I think there's many ways of finding that.
Yeah. What board do you ride?
So I ride a Nitro, and the model is called Santoku. And 162 is mostly the size that I've been riding. Sometimes now 159. But I've helped
That's big,
work on that board for. Yeah, the thing is, I've helped work on that board for a couple of years now, and it actually came from a shape that was called Uber Spoon. So like, you know, basically referring to like the nose and the tail being like much bigger, starting much earlier than other nose and tails would. And we've taken that shape also in the new concept. That means that the effective edge length is actually much shorter than the total length of the board. And that's what you feel, you know, the effective edge length is what you feel of how quick the board turns, say, if you're in the slope. But the long nose and tail, they really give you the float in powder. And that really helps so much. So I love riding that big board that feels like a really small board. But yeah, it's amazing that way.
Wow. So is that the board you use for only powder, or is that like your all mountain board that you use?
I love the idea of just having one board all season.
One board.
And so in the past years, I've tried to only do that. I just like the idea of, say, this freestyle approach of like, whatever comes my way, I can play with it. I don't need to be so sort of specific. Oh, I don't have the right board for it. But there's limits to it. I have to admit now, like I had to admit that, yes, for bank slaloms, for instance, you know, trying to be really fast, I was fairly slow with the one that I was always riding. And once I started to like try another one, I'm like, oh shit, I guess that is faster. Just because it's so much tailored to like racing style.
Yeah.
But for say 90% of the time or more, I just ride the Santoku.
Okay. Do you work with that company? Is that Nitro, right? You said?
Yeah, Nitro. They're actually pretty close to where I live, 1.5 hours from Innsbruck in Germany. And like, it's so amazing. I'm with Nitro since probably 10 years or more.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, working on the board, for instance, is super cool. Like also the graphics now, we've just finished the graphics for this year.
Yeah.
But also on like whatever I want to try out, they make samples and they're curious. So that's actually quite beautiful in that way. Have partners like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so many, you know, especially if you're on Instagram and you follow different snowboarders, and every time I'm like, oh, look, that's a new snowboard. And I love my snowboard. Like I have a snowboard that I absolutely love, but you know, it's just one of those things where I'm like, I have like a queue list of like 5 or 6 snowboards that I'm probably never going to buy. But it's just so enticing. You're like, oh, maybe that one's a little bit better. Maybe this one I can use for this or for that. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one.
Yeah.
And there's so many out there. There's so many new companies out. It's hard to kind of decipher which is the best one for you, you know?
Right. Well, I think personally, generally speaking, I wouldn't give too much weight on product. It does make a difference, but the biggest difference is what you get used to and what you make your board in one way. Like that what really plays the biggest role. You can maybe ride a board that at first feels weird, and after say half a year, you're like, oh, this is the best board in the world. Just because this has then become the board you've adapted your riding towards, or and that's, I don't know. And so I think sometimes if you try and find the best product, it's hard because the product can only be as good as it matches your riding at the time, and like how you sort of like also groove in with a product.
Yeah.
So in the past, I honestly wouldn't give that much about product. And I'm glad about it. And like now I love throwing myself into it and like developing it and kind of nerding out on these things, but I don't think it should play the biggest role really.
So what are some tips that maybe you can give people that are intermediate snowboarders, not beginners, but people who are kind of middle of the road and they want to take their snowboarding to the next level? They want to improve. What are some maybe tips that they could use?
Yeah. So I find one misconception may be that you need to be brave to progress in snowboarding. You need to just be brave and throw yourself out there, like, do it. Just do that trick or that jump or something. And I would disagree on that personally, because the ones that got really good in snowboarding, the people that I've seen come up and make a career out of it were often people that were quite calculated, actually.
Really?
That were quite smart about risk management. And so I think risk management is a key in snowboarding. Of course, the biggest and foremost thing you got to have is passion. If you have the passion, love to just go out and keep at it and just love doing it, that's the best and most important thing you've got to have and maintain. So, I think that's the source of it all. And if you have that source, that's beautiful, but don't think you need to jump like 3 steps ahead, at a time. In fact, if you can build in as little steps as possible in your progression, that's perfect. Because then every step you do is like kind of, you find new comfort in that. You find hopefully good, proper comfort in that, and you can widen it with the next step and the next step and the next step. And that, leads up to like a 1080. Coming from, say, doing your first turns on the slope.
Yeah.
There's a million steps in between to that 1080. Starting to like jump off little sort of side hits on the slope, like catching some air, then, riding switch a bit, maybe starting to jump and do a 180. So, half a rotation. And then once you really feel comfortable in this, you can do this 180 in multiple directions, 4 directions, front side, back side, and the same in switch, front side, switch, back side. So I'm saying there's so many steps that are all important in their own. And I think if you sort of really internalize that as your way of progression, that really can go far. And if you try and jump sort of like steps, that just so easily leads to an injury or a setback, or you get scared, and like it just doesn't seem to like have so much longevity.
Yeah, that's a big one. I feel like a lot of people, they'll try something, or maybe they think that, I don't need a tutor or a coach to show me what to do. And then they fall and they break something, and then they're kind of scared afterwards to go back for a few years because they don't want to break something again,
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the injury that may take, half a year, how many days could you have on the mountain?
Yeah.
Kind of taking it mellow, but progressing every time a little more. if you didn't get injured then.
Yeah.
Not saying that injuries, can happen and are a part of it, unfortunately, but they are. But that's kind of the logic, that if you don't have those setbacks, or not as many, that takes you far.
Yeah. I've been training Muay Thai for many, many years. And there's a saying that one of my coaches here says, and I feel like it's true for everything. He says, if you look good at something, most likely you do it well. And I feel like that's so true. Like when you look at you guys on the mountain, it almost looks like it's easy, right? Like you do it so well and it looks so good when you're doing it, that I think someone sitting at home is thinking like, I could probably do that. That doesn't look too hard. And that's a credit to you, right? Because you do it so well and so efficiently, and you have all that experience that you just make it look easy. And I think that's something that is an acquired, it's acquired. It takes time to get to that level, but it almost becomes second nature to you at some point. It's almost like, I don't know, doing a 180 or flip, I don't know, whatever the trick is, or wherever big mountain it is, you just do it like it's second nature, like drinking water, like going to sleep. It's nothing, just one more thing you do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think what is style? I guess style is a pretty personal expression of movement. Everyone does their things different, does walk different, does also snowboard different. So everyone has their own style in that way.
Yeah.
But I also found that style really comes to show when someone feels comfortable at what they do. And that's where the beauty really emerges, I find, that when you really see someone that's very comfortable at what they do, whether it's surfing or snowboarding, that's when it starts to become so beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And to find that comfort, you really need to be secure at it. It's not enough to just barely being able to do the trick. And that's maybe along those lines of what you just meant.
Yeah, it's poetry in motion. When I watched the film, there's a guy there, your film, Contraddiction, there's a guy, Kevin, right? 64-year-old dude, yeah. A little bit, like colorful character. And I think this is something that I've kind of battled with, and I'm sure a lot of people do. It's this notion of growing old and potentially having to stop doing the things you love because at some age you're just going to have to give it up. And I've always had this like idea that I have to cram as much snowboarding time as I can, because when I get in my head, I thought when I would get to 50, I wouldn't be able to do snowboarding anymore because, I'd be old and it's just, it wouldn't be safe or whatever the reason. I just thought maybe physically I wouldn't be able to. And then you see someone like him, and he's not the only guy. I've seen other people who are in their 60s and some people are in their 70s and they're still snowboarding, but it's so inspirational to look at them, right? And kind of get a little bit of some of their pearls of wisdom and realize that, dude, life isn't over at a certain age. It's just, it's all mental. It's all however you perceive life to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also like the idea that there's a time for everything. So I think what we get to experience with snowboarding is not only to be experienced in snowboarding.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to find joy and flow, those things that we maybe seek in the sport. And so one thing that for me, for instance, comes to mind there is like when I see people playing the piano, being musicians, like how incredibly beautiful that is if you can really be so one with the music, but also with the device you're playing it with the instrument. It just seems so incredible. And maybe it would probably be super hard for me to catch on to like any of that and become good at it. But I just find it so amazing how many sort of ways in there is to find, like such joy of practicing something,
Yeah.
Say, generally speaking, it doesn't necessarily need to be a very physical sport that then becomes impossible from a certain age on, or it becomes much harder. So at least I would like to look at it this way, that I would like not to force things for much longer than they are meant to last, or that they are possible to last. And I would like them to hopefully switch on to things that are possible at the time. Surfing, for instance, is much less impact, it seems. But who knows? Where I'm at now, and let's say where I'm at when I'm 65 and struggling maybe to keep snowboarding.
What is there anything right now that has kind of caught your attention, or something that in the back of your head you're like, I really want to maybe invest more time in learning this or perfecting this craft? Just anything that you've been attracted to lately?
One thing that I was quite into now was the filmmaking part that I quite enjoyed to throw myself into, and storytelling, learning how narrative, storytelling functions, documentaries. So that's something I really like. But also for the purpose of doing something that I see value in, that has a certain purpose to me. And that is for sure a driving motive for me that continues to be there. So I would like to get involved in, say, social or environmental projects with the role as a professional snowboarder for the years to come.
Yeah.
That's just something I would love to just get more involved and get to know, and maybe also get some know-how in this area. I guess for the years to come, that's where I see myself kind of diving into.
That's awesome, man. And
aside from being a snowboarder.
Yeah. No, and watching your movies, I think the product that you're gonna make, the end product is gonna be amazing. Because again, I'll people should go watch the movie, The Contraddiction, because it's a very different movie. It just has a very different feel, very artsy. The music is different. The whole vibe of it is very, very cool. So, I'm sure anything that you put your hand on or kind of get into, it'll be awesome.
But yeah, appreciate it that you like the film. Thank you.
Yeah, man, 100%. So, Elias, I want to thank you, man. I had awesome time. I love talking to you. I love talking about snowboarding. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I had a blast, man.
Yeah, it was nice. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, definitely. Where can people find you on the internets, on the social media?
I guess social media, the easiest would be Instagram. So just my name, Elias Elhardt.
Okay.
Or Elias Elhardt. Probably the platform that I just do the most on, and that I would communicate if there was, say, a new film or a project that I would get involved in.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll add it in the show notes. I'll put a link so people can find you, make it easier. And yeah, man, thanks again. I had an awesome time. Maybe we can do it again in the future.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Stay safe on those waves.
Yeah, I try to.
All right. Goodbye, man.